Proverbs 15:1 for our reading, Jeremy?
A soft answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger.
There's a story of a man who bought his children 4 goldfish. Have you ever tried to buy goldfish and have them as pets and actually been successful with it? Yeah, maybe, some. Yeah, ours died a few years ago when we tried it. What's that?
Did you put air in the tank? You can't just put it in one of those little bowls without any bubbles.
Hey, I bought the tank and everything.
Yeah,
Goldfish don't live.
I can't remember. It was a disaster either way. But so this man, he buys 4 goldfish for his children, and he goes out shopping for a tank. And after shopping around for a while, he finds a nice 10-gallon tank for $5 because it was a display model. And the thing was filthy, but he was going to get this tank, the filter, and all the gravel for $5. So, I mean, to him, spending a few hours cleaning this thing was no problem. So he takes the thing home, and he spends a few hours cleaning it out and puts the goldfish in, and everything's going great first couple of days. And then that third morning, he wakes up, and one of the goldfish is belly up. And, well, he's still got 3 more. And by the next morning, the second one is dead. And then by that night, a third one is a casualty. And so at this point, it's time to, before he loses them all, it's time to call in his friend who has a 30-gallon tank, and he's an experienced, goldfish fisher, whatever, fishinarian, thank you, Maggie. He's an experienced goldfishinarian. He calls his friend in, and his friend analyzes it. It doesn't take him very long, and he recognizes the problem. See, what happened was he used soap to clean out this tank, and that is a huge no-no. In his efforts, he had destroyed the very lives that he was trying to protect. Sometimes we too can use these killer soaps in dealing with other people. Condemnation, criticism, nagging, fits of temper. And we think we're doing right. Usually in the moment when we're angry and we're acting this way, we feel very justified in what we're doing. But our harsh, self-righteous treatment is more than people can bear. And by self-righteous, I don't necessarily mean a self-proclaimed godliness or a holier than thou. A lot of times when we think of self-righteousness, we think of this good, moral, religious person who is thumbing their nose at other people. No, self-righteousness can be found in the most godly person, can also be found in the most ungodly or the irreligious person as well. You see, it works like this. We have some cause or some hang up, and when others intrude on our sense of justice, and my wife can tell you I have a very high sense of justice, which can be a strength but can also be a weakness, we feel we have to clean up the situation. We have to make it right. We have to give that policeman who pulled us over in a 20-mile-per-hour speed zone and you're going 25 or 30, we feel we have to give him a piece of our mind. We feel we have to get the last word in with an authority figure, whether it's a boss or a parent, whatever it may be. We feel we have to nag our spouse in trying to change them. Or we feel we have to sternly refuse when we feel like we are being nagged. But these reactions rarely ever work. And at the best, we just get frustrated. At worst, we end up like this YouTube video I saw this week. There's a truck and a car, and the car had, in traffic, had cut off the truck. And the woman in the passenger seat of the truck, she got angry. She gets out of the car, and she goes up to the window and starts to give these 2 men a piece of her mind. And as she's walking away, they throw their drink at her. And so her boyfriend gets angry, gets out of the truck, walks up to the car, and kicks the grill. Then the 2 men get out of the car and proceed to kick his tail. In the middle of the melee, this woman gets hit in the face. And at that point, I think the boyfriend decides, okay, maybe it's a good idea that we get out of here. And so he takes her and they run and they get back in their car. The men go back to their car. You think finally the ordeal's over. Well, the man in the truck kicks it in reverse and speeds and runs into their car and then takes off. Then they finish getting in their car and they take off after the people in the truck. And who knows what happened next? Because they overreacted. Because they were in traffic. It wasn't even on a speeding highway. They're in traffic and this car cut them off. And situations like that, they just escalate, and sometimes people even end up dead. All because you couldn't let something go. All because you couldn't turn the other cheek. It escalated. What does the Bible say about this kind of overreaction? Proverbs 15:1, a soft answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. So 1 Samuel 25, let's turn there. 1 Samuel 25, we see this principle of gentleness in action. 1 Samuel 25, story of David, a man named Nabal, and his wife Abigail. You there? All right. Starting in verse 1, says that David rose and went down to the wilderness of Paran. Now this is sandwiched in between 24 and 26. This is the time that Saul is pursuing David. We've talked about this a couple times over the last several weeks. Saul, King Saul at the time, knew that David was God's chosen one. And he was the one that was going to end up taking the throne. And God was going to make it happen. And jealousy overtook him. And he was enraged. He was a crazy man. He was a lunatic. So David, for all these years, is trying to avoid the pursuit of Saul. And so during this time, David arose and he went down to the wilderness of Paran. And there was a man in Maon whose business was in Carmel. The man was very rich. He had 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats. He was shearing his sheep in Carmel. Now the name of the man was Nabal, and the name of his wife Abigail. The woman was discerning and beautiful, but the man was harsh and badly behaved. He was a Calebite. Actually, the Calebites were a good tribe, came from a good man named Caleb. But all of this is a foreshadowing. He was harsh and badly behaved. This speaks to his character, lest we think what is about to take place in the story is an isolated incident. No, this has to do with who Nabal is as a person. Nabal's attitude is not justified, and it's not an isolated mistake. Jesus says in chapter 6 of Luke, verses 43 through 45, he says, "No good tree bears bad fruit, nor again does a bad tree bear good fruit. For each tree is known by its fruit." Meaning that we all produce some sort of fruit. A lot of times we think about the fruit of the Spirit and the fruit we produce. But by our actions, by our behavior, by our words, by our thoughts, we are producing fruit. And what Jesus says is this comes from a source, from a root, and that root is our hearts. Jesus says, "For figs are not gathered from thorn bushes, nor are grapes picked from a bramble bush. The good person out of the good treasure of his heart produces good, and the evil person out of his evil treasure produces evil. For out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks." And so this speaks to Nabal's character. He was, as a person, a harsh and badly behaved man. He had a history of this. Now, this is a good character check, coupled with Jesus' words here. This is a good character check for all of us. In fact, a great Christian man that I know, actually I highly admire this man. I won't say his name, but he once said, "When I read the words of Jesus here, I realize that I've still got evil in me that needs to be worked out." Now, if it's a character check for Larry, whoops, and my friend, I'm bragging about him, so I don't mind naming names when I'm bragging about somebody. But if it's a good character check for Larry, it's a good character check for us. So when we speak evil or we do evil, we shouldn't be looking to justify our actions. We should realize that there's still evil in us that needs to be worked out by the Spirit of God. It's an opportunity to submit to God's grace and let Him work in and through us. So back to our passage here, verse 4. David heard in the wilderness that Nabal was shearing his sheep. So David sent 10 young men, and David said to the young men, "Go up to Carmel, and go to Nabal, and greet him in my name. And thus you shall greet him. Peace be to you, and peace be to your house, and peace be to all that you have." It's a kind greeting. Verse 7. I hear that you have shearers. Now your shepherds have been with us, and we did them no harm. And they missed nothing all the time they were in Carmel. So what David is saying is why he was out there in the wilderness, Nabal's shepherds were out there, and they actually protected them. He says, ask your young men, and they will tell you. Therefore, let my young men find favor in your eyes. For we come on a feast day. Please give whatever you have at hand to your servants and to your son David. And so what David is hoping here is he's shown a kind gesture to this man's shepherds. He's hoping for a kind gesture in return. They have been out. They are weary. They are hungry. But it's also a time of festivities. And he's hoping that they would show an act of kindness and share with him. Nabal's response. Verse 9, when David's young men came, they said all this to Nabal in the name of David, and then they waited. And Nabal answered David's servants, "Get off my lawn." Basically, is what he said. He says, "Who is David? And who is the son of Jesse?" He knows who David is. He knows who Jesse is. He says this facetiously. He says this sarcastically. You see, David and Saul had an obvious feud, and Nabal had not only taken sides, but he used this as an excuse not to show compassion toward David. It's like today, us saying, "You stinking Democrat, I ain't showing you any compassion." Goes on to say, there are many servants these days who are breaking away from their masters. Shall I take my bread and my water and my meat that I have killed from my shearers and give it to men who come from where I do not know? We must be careful of justifying our way right out of the work that God has called us to do. We say this in things, and we've spoken about before. We should be wise. We should be good stewards, and sometimes we have to show tough love. But we have to be careful that our excuses of they probably don't work, or they'll probably use it on drugs, or whatever your excuse may be, you've got to be careful that it doesn't create a character within yourself that never helps anybody else. I've seen it. People with no compassion, and they have an excuse every time they show a lack of compassion. Verse 12. So David's young men turned away and came back and told him all this. And David said to his men, "Every man strap on your sword." He's incited the anger of David. He's provoked David to anger. And David is uncontrollable at this moment. He's like the woman that got out of the car that couldn't control herself. He's saying, this guy's not going to punk me. He had road rage in this moment. And every man of them strapped on his sword. David also strapped on his sword, and about 400 men went up after David, while 200 remained with the baggage. Nabal's attitude had provoked David. Soft answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. As I was in the middle of this message, I'm sitting there at the table, literally, and Zane is texting a friend on his iPad, and he realized that a day ago, he had texted the wrong email address. He had gotten a letter wrong, and he told me, because they asked, who's Zane? And I told him, I said, just text back, sorry, wrong number. And so he texted back, sorry, wrong number. And they texted back, and I said, well, what'd they say? He said, okay, please don't contact me again. Man, I wanted so bad to grab that iPad and reply to them. I wanted to tell her off. I mean, that's how I felt, or say how rude or something. Then I started saying, okay, Scott, there's no reason to react. Turn the other cheek. Just let it go. And then I wanted to send well, maybe I should send back God bless you or something. You ever done that? It can still be just as wrong if your heart's not in the right place. I don't think that's what Jesus meant when he said, bless those who curse you. Especially if we have with a spiteful heart. I was provoked, but if I would have reacted, what would it have accomplished? My need to be right? To serve my own justification? My need to be justified? It would have served no purpose. So verse 14, back to our passage. One of the young men told Abigail, Nabal's wife, behold, David sent messengers out of the wilderness to greet our master, and he railed at them. Yet the men were very good to us, and we suffered no harm, and we did not miss anything when we were in the fields, as long as we went with them. They were a wall to us, both day and night. All the while we were with them keeping the sheep. So he's testifying right there how good David and his servants were to them. Verse 17. Now, therefore, know this and consider what you should do, Abigail, for harm is determined against our master and against all his house. And he is such a worthless man, that Nabal, that one cannot speak to him. Let's not be one who is stubborn that nobody can talk to. Are you that person nobody can speak sense into you? Because you're not teachable, because you always have to be right, because you're stubborn. Don't be that person. Don't be that person. Because you know what happens when you're that person? When you never allow yourself to be corrected, and dare I say even rebuked, we never grow in the Lord. You'll never grow in the Lord. You'll never grow as a person. You'll never be what God has called you to be, all that he has called you to be. Let us walk in humility. That's next week's topic. Verse 18. Then Abigail made haste and took 200 loaves and 2 skins of wine and 5 sheep already prepared and 5 seahs of parched grain and 100 clusters of raisins and 200 cakes of figs and laid them on donkeys. And she said to her young men, go on before me. Behold, I come after you. But she did not tell her husband Nabal. And as she rode on the donkey and came down under cover of the mountain, behold, David and his men came down towards her, and she met them. And now David had already said, surely in vain I've guarded all this fellow has in the wilderness. He's mad. I did all this for them. We worked so hard for them, and this is what he returns me with, so that nothing was missed of all that belonged to him, and he has returned me evil for good. God, do so to the enemies of David and more also, if by morning I leave so much as one male among all who belong to him. David is ticked off. So David goes down and meets Abigail. You see, what's happened here is David has done good to Nabal, right? And guarding his men and protecting his men. He's done good to Nabal, but Nabal has returned David's good with evil. Now David is ready to return evil. David is not at all justified in what he is doing here. It is a fit of rage and anger. And so let me ask you, when does it stop? Now think about your own encounters, your own circumstances when this has happened. When does it stop? Somebody does you wrong, you get mad, you lash back out. What's going to happen when you lash back out? Are they ever put in their place and shut up and go on their merry way? That rarely happens unless they have the Spirit of God with them and he convicts them before he convicts you. It escalates. Just like those 2 vehicles on YouTube. It happens every time. But I love what Abigail does here. Romans 12, 20 through 21 says, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. And if he is thirsty, give him something to drink. For by doing so, listen to this, you will heap burning coals on his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Listen to that. That is so good. Do not be overcome with evil, but overcome evil with good. And so Abigail begins to intercede. Back one. Verse 23. When Abigail saw David, she hurried and got down from the donkey and fell before David on her face and bowed to the ground. She fell at his feet and she said, on me alone, my Lord, be the guilt. Oh man, that's a beautiful, beautiful, wonderful foreshadowing of Christ. Did you know that this is the same attitude Jesus had towards the Father concerning you? On me alone, my Lord, be the guilt. She's prefiguring Christ there. Let your servant speak in your ears and hear the words of your servant. Let not my Lord regard this worthless fellow Nabal, for that is his name. Could you believe this guy, his name was Nabal, which meant fool? I mean, who in the world would name their kid fool? Some people think that possibly it was a nickname because you just can't fathom somebody naming their kid fool. But that was his name. It meant fool. Let not my Lord regard this worthless fellow, she's talking about her own husband, Nabal, for as his name is, so is he. Nabal is his name, and folly is with him. But I, your servant, did not see the young man of my Lord whom you sent. Now then, my Lord, as the Lord lives, and as your soul lives, because the Lord has restrained you from blood guilt, and from saving with your own hand. So she's recognizing right there that, David, you're not right. If you do this, you're not right in doing that. And so may the Lord restrain you through me. David's reaction was not at all justified. You see, sometimes we think we're fighting God's battles when the truth is we're fighting our own battles. David is not fighting for God here. God's like, whoa, nope, hands off here. I mean, I send you to war and to justified war. This is not, no, David. This is wrong. And David knows it in his heart. Romans 12, 17 through 19. Right before our previous passage from Romans, repay no one evil for evil, but give thought to do what is honorable in the sight of all. If possible, so far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all. So far as it depends on you, you should try to live peaceably with all. Sometimes that's unavoidable, but if it's up to us, we are to strive to live peaceably. Beloved, never avenge yourselves, but leave it to the wrath of God, for it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. That's true now, and that was also true in David's day. Vengeance belongs to the Lord. Back to our passage, the latter half of verse 26 says, now then let your enemies, this is Abigail speaking, now then let your enemies and those who seek to do evil to my Lord be as Nabal. Verse 27, and now let this present and your start over there. And now let this present that your servant has brought up to my Lord be given to the young men who follow my Lord. Please forgive the trespass of your servant. And then she goes on to commend David as a man of God, which he was, and asks for his kindness in return. And so David's anger is calmed by the gentleness of Abigail. Go down to verse 32. David said to Abigail, blessed be the Lord, the God of Israel, who sent you this day to meet me. Blessed be your discretion. Blessed be your attitude, your calmness, and blessed be you who have kept me this day from blood guilt and from working salvation with my own hand. For surely as the Lord, the God of Israel lives, who has restrained me from hurting you, unless you had hurried and come to meet me, truly by morning there had not been left to Nabal so much as one male. David says, thank you for interceding and keeping me from sin, from keeping me from utterly losing it and doing something that I would regret. Verse 35, then David received from her what she had brought him, and he said to her, go up in peace to your house. See, I have obeyed your voice, and I have granted your petition. Abigail's meekness, her gentleness, taught David to do the same. So then Abigail, she goes home to her husband, and that night he's plastered, he's drunk, so she waits till the morning when he's sobered up, and she tells Nabal what David had planned to do to him and all of his men and how she interceded on his behalf. And the Bible says in verse 37 that he became as a stone. What happened there is he either had a stroke or a heart attack immediately upon hearing this. And then about 10 days later, the Lord struck Nabal and he died. Verse 39, David blesses God because he restrained and let the Lord fight his battles, and the Lord fought on his behalf. He recognized that vengeance belonged to the Lord. Proverbs 15:1, a soft answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. Blessed are those who are gentle. Sometimes gentleness in the Bible is translated meekness. If meekness is an attitude, then gentleness is the action of that attitude. It's how we act upon our attitude of meekness. It was once said, there's nothing so strong as gentleness and nothing so gentle as real strength. You see, being gentle or meek, it's not weakness. Have you heard? It's controlled strength. It's not letting people roll over you. It doesn't mean to be spineless or easily taken advantage of. It's controlled strength. And it's not simply being nice. It's speaking the truth in love. It's that love in action when we speak the truth. I mean, we can speak harshly and say, I'm doing it in love, but it's not love. Gentleness is that love in action when we speak the truth. And so sometimes, yes, we do have to say things that people don't want to hear. That is the case. But sometimes it's the way you say things. It's how you say things, not always what you say. Does that make sense? And men, gentleness and meekness is manly. There's a pseudo-manhood in our culture that says that the gentleness, meekness is weakness, but that is not the case. The greatest man ever alive exhibited gentleness. His name was Jesus. It's a virtue to be valued and to be sought after. We can still be tough, strong men and be gentle and be meek. In fact, it's a fruit of the Spirit. We need something greater than ourselves controlling us, namely God's love. Are you saturated in God's love? Are you consumed with God's love? God's word? What are you renewing your mind with? And God's Spirit must control us. Jesus said that the meek shall inherit the earth. That's the attitude of God's children. We are meek. Indeed, it's the way of Christ. And we close with Matthew 11:28 through 30. Come to me, Jesus said, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, for you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Jesus was gentle. May we seek to be the same. Let us not overcome evil with evil, but let us overcome evil with good.